My phone rang at 11 minutes past midnight, and I knew before I answered it that something was wrong, because my grandson never calls that late unless the world has come apart. Grandpa. Tyler's voice cracked on the second syllable, wet and shaking. Grandpa, please, I need you to come to the hospital. They won't let me see her. They keep asking me questions like I did something. And I didn't, Grandpa. I swear I didn't touch her. I was already reaching for my shoes. Slow down, son. Breathe. Which hospital? St. Vincent's. It's Nana. They're saying it's an overdose. They found pills in my bag, Grandpa. I don't even know how they got there. I did not sleep that night, and by the time I walked through the sliding doors of St. Mark, Vincent's emergency wing 40 minutes later, the security guard at the front desk looked up, opened his mouth to ask my business, and then went very still. Detective Whitfield, he said, and it wasn't a question. I didn't know you were connected to this family. That was the moment I understood this was not going to be a simple night. My name is Robert Whitfield. I'm 63 years old, and for 31 of those years, I wore a badge for the Cook County Sheriff's Department, the last 9 of them as a homicide detective, before I hung it up for good. I thought I'd left that life behind me when I retired. I thought the only crime scenes I'd ever walk into again would be the ones on television, with a cup of decaf in my hand and my dog Biscuit asleep at my feet. I was wrong. And if you've ever had to become the man you used to be in order to protect the people you love, then you understand exactly what happened to me on that freezing October night, and I hope you'll stay with me, because this story still keeps me up some nights, even now that it's over. Before I go further, tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. And if you've ever fought for someone in your family when the whole world seemed to be against them, hit that like button for me. It means more than you know. I need to take you back about 18 months to give you the shape of my family, because you cannot understand the storm without first understanding the calm that came before it. My wife, Diane, passed 6 years ago. Cancer took her slow, and it took most of the light out of our house with her. What kept me standing after that was my daughter, Rachel, and her son, my grandson, Tyler, who was 14 when his father, my son-in-law, was killed in a construction accident. Rachel never fully recovered from that loss. She became quiet in a way that frightened me, the kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's just grief wearing a calm face so it doesn't scare the neighbors. I moved in with them for a while. I taught Tyler how to change a tire and how to throw a proper punch in case he ever needed it, and how to sit with silence without needing to fill it. He grew into a good kid, serious, watchful, the kind of boy who notices things. Then Rachel met Craig. Craig Doyle ran a chain of physical therapy clinics across 3 counties, and on paper, he was exactly what my daughter needed. Steady income, good manners. He held doors and remembered birthdays and called me sir the first 6 times we met, which I'll admit, flattered an old cop more than it should have. Rachel lit back up around him, in a way I hadn't seen since before the accident, and for that alone I wanted to like him. I told myself my hesitation was just an old detective's habit of distrusting anyone who seemed too polished. I told myself that a lot, actually, over the 11 months between the wedding and the night my phone rang at midnight. Tyler never took to him. He was 16 by then, and teenagers have a way of being right about people that adults have trained themselves out of. There's something off about him, Grandpa. He told me once over burgers, refusing to look up from his plate. He's nice till the second mom's not in the room. Then it's like a light switches off behind his eyes. I told him grief makes people see shadows where there aren't any. I have spent every day since regretting that I did not listen to a 16-year-old boy who was simply telling me the truth. The call that night was the second phone call, not the first. The first had come 9 days earlier, and it was Rachel, sounding thinner than her own voice, telling me that Craig had convinced her to sign updated life insurance paperwork for the family's protection, now that they were married, and that Tyler had been added as a secondary beneficiary should anything ever happen to her, which struck me at the time as morbid, but not sinister. It's the kind of thing responsible people do, I told myself. I did not think about it again until I was standing in a hospital corridor watching 2 uniformed officers question my grandson like he was a suspect instead of a terrified boy. Detective Whitfield, the younger officer, a kid named Ortiz who I'd trained myself 9 or 10 years back, straightened up so fast he nearly knocked over a rolling cart. Sir, we didn't know you were the grandfather. We got a call about a possible overdose situation. Your daughter was found unresponsive at home. Your grandson called it in. We found a bottle of oxycodone in his backpack, sir. prescribed under his name, which, given everything, raised some flags. Prescribed under his name, I repeated. Tyler doesn't take oxycodone. Never has. He plays baseball and doesn't even take aspirin for a sprained ankle. That's what he's saying too, sir. I looked past Ortiz to where Tyler sat on a plastic chair against the wall, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees, and when he saw me, his face did the thing it used to do when he was 7 years old and had broken something he loved. I crossed the corridor and put my hand on the back of his neck, the way I used to when he was small, and felt him start shaking, quiet and controlled, the way boys shake when they've been holding it together for people who are watching. Tell me everything, I said, from the beginning. Slow. He told me that he'd come home from practice around 10 to find his mother on the kitchen floor, barely breathing. An empty pill bottle beside her hand, his prescription bottle, he said, except he'd never filled it, never even picked it up from the pharmacy, because he'd never been prescribed anything. He'd called 911. He'd ridden in the ambulance, and somewhere between the house and the hospital, a patrol officer had asked him a routine question about the pills, and Tyler, panicking, had said something like, "Those aren't mine. I don't even take those," which, in the mouth of a frightened 16-year-old boy standing over his unconscious mother, had apparently sounded, to unfamiliar ears, like the opening line of a confession. "Where's Craig?" I asked. Tyler's jaw tightened. He wasn't home. He said he had a late clinic consult. He got here maybe 20 minutes after I did. He keeps telling the police I've been struggling, Grandpa. He keeps saying it real quiet, like he doesn't want me to hear. Except, he wants me to hear. He's telling them I've been depressed since Dad died, that I've been secretive, that he found empty bottles in my room before. None of that is true. None of it. I have interviewed more liars in my career than most men will meet in a lifetime, and there is a particular rhythm to a lie that has been rehearsed for exactly the right audience. It has a gentleness to it. It apologizes for itself before anyone's accused it of anything. It says, "I hate to say this, and please don't make me the bad guy here," while it quietly hands a knife to the nearest authority figure and steps back to watch. I found Craig in the family consultation room 20 minutes later, sitting with his hands folded and his tie slightly loosened, the picture of a man trying to hold himself together for everyone else's sake, and I recognized the performance immediately because I had watched men give it in interrogation rooms for 3 decades. Robert. He stood when I entered, reaching to shake my hand, and I did not take it. "God, I'm glad you're here. This has been a nightmare. I keep telling the officers, Tyler's been in a bad place for months, ever since." "Since when, Craig?" He blinked, recalibrating. "Since his father. I know it's hard for you to hear, but I've found things in his room. Pills. A journal with some very dark writing in it. Rachel and I didn't want to worry you. We thought we could handle it as a family. Get him help quietly. Without what? Without making it a whole thing." He spread his hands, a gesture of wounded reasonableness. "I love that boy like my own son, Robert. I've been trying to protect him from himself." I sat down across from him, slow and deliberate, the way I used to sit down across from men who thought slowness meant weakness. I watched his face while he talked, the way I'd watched 1,000 faces before his, and here is what I saw. When a man is telling you something true and painful about someone he loves, his eyes tell a different story than his mouth. There's a flicker of genuine reluctance, a small wince before the hard words come out, because some part of him doesn't want to say them. Craig's mouth trembled with concern on cue, right where the sentence needed it to, but his eyes stayed flat and watchful the entire time, tracking my reaction the way you'd track a gauge on a dashboard, checking whether the needle was moving where you wanted it to move. There was no wince, there was no reluctance. There was only a man delivering a script and monitoring its reception. "You said you found a journal," I said. "I'd like to see it. It's at the house. I can show you tomorrow. Once things have settled." Once things have settled. Not once Rachel wakes up. Not once we know she's alive. I filed that away and asked him nothing else that night, because 31 years on the job taught me that the surest way to lose a liar is to let him know you're hunting him. Rachel remained unconscious for 11 hours. The toxicology report that came back the next afternoon should have ended the story right there. And in a way, it did. Except not in the direction anyone in that hospital room expected. The oxycodone in her system was real, but so was something else, a secondary compound the ER toxicologist flagged as unusual enough to mention twice, a sedating antihistamine at a dose far beyond anything over the counter, the kind of combination the doctor said carefully, choosing her words, that isn't typically self-administered by accident. Because the two substances together aren't something a person reaches for on purpose. It's a combination someone reaches for when they want another person very deeply asleep, and then wants to make that sleep look like something else afterward. I asked whether Rachel had any prescriptions for the antihistamine. She did not. Craig did, from an old shoulder surgery 2 years back. A bottle I later learned he had refilled twice in the past month despite the injury having long since healed. Here is the part of this story that still turns my stomach, all this time later, and I want to tell it slowly, because it deserves to be told slowly. Over the following 4 days, while Rachel lay in a medically induced coma to protect her heart from the strain the drugs had put on it, I did what I used to do for a living. I did not confront Craig. I did not accuse him. I sat in his kitchen and drank his coffee, and let him believe that a heartbroken old man was simply grateful his daughter was alive, while I quietly called in every favor I had left in this world. My old partner, Marcus Webb, still worked financial crimes. I asked him, off the books, to pull whatever he could on Craig Doyle's clinics. What came back took my breath away. 2 of his 3 physical therapy locations were operating at a steady, quiet loss, bleeding money for the better part of a year, propped up by loans against the equity in the house. Craig now shared with my daughter a house that, thanks to that insurance paperwork Rachel had signed 9 days before, would be worth considerably more to Craig with her gone than with her breathing. The policy, Marcus discovered, had been increased twice in the past year. Twice, quietly, through a broker Craig golfed with. Tyler, as the listed secondary beneficiary, stood to inherit nothing directly. The funds would pass first through Craig, as the surviving spouse and legal guardian of a minor, meaning Craig would control every dollar of it until Tyler turned 21, assuming, of course, that Craig remained in the picture to control it. I want you to sit with that for a moment, the way I had to sit with it. A man had married my grieving daughter, waited less than a year, quietly inflated a policy on her life, drugged her in her own kitchen, and prepared to let a 16-year-old boy carry the blame for it, all so that he could keep a failing business afloat with someone else's death. I did not have proof yet. I had a policeman's certainty and a father's fury, which are 2 very different things, and only one of them holds up in court. So I went back to basics. I had Tyler, carefully, and without alarming him further, describe every detail of that evening, what his mother had eaten, what she'd had to drink, what time Craig said he'd left for his consult. Small inconsistencies began to surface the way they always do, once you know to look for them. The clinic Craig claimed to have been at that evening had, according to Marcus, closed its doors at 6. Craig said he'd left the house at 7. There was a 40-minute gap in his account of that night that nobody, including Craig, could quite account for. I asked my old friend Denise, who still ran evidence intake downtown, whether she could quietly rush a fingerprint comparison on the oxycodone bottle found in Tyler's backpack, the one bearing his name, that he swore he'd never filled. It came back clean of Tyler's prints entirely. Every print on that bottle belonged to one person, and it was not my grandson. I confronted Craig on a Thursday evening, 6 days after that midnight phone call, in the same kitchen where he'd drugged my daughter. I did not raise my voice. 31 years taught me that men like Craig do not break under shouting. They break under stillness, under the specific silence of someone who already knows and is simply waiting to see whether you'll have the decency to admit it yourself. The clinic closed at 6 that night, I said. You told the officers you left at 7. Something shifted behind his eyes, the flicker of a man recalculating in real time. I must have misremembered the timing. It was stressful. The fingerprints on that pill bottle aren't Tyler's, Craig. They're yours. I let that sit in the room for a moment. You filled a prescription in a 16-year-old's name that he never authorized, using his information from paperwork you had access to as his stepfather. You increased Rachel's life insurance twice in the past year. Your clinics are underwater by $400,000. And you left my grandson standing over his unconscious mother, ready to let the police believe whatever story was easiest, so long as it wasn't yours. He tried, briefly, to find his footing, a stammered sentence about how none of this was what it looked like, about how I was a grieving old man seeing conspiracies everywhere, but the eyes had already given him away, and some men know the moment the mask has slipped that there's no putting it back on. What finally broke him, in the end, wasn't me at all. It was Denise's fingerprint report, formally filed the following morning, and a subpoena for the insurance broker's records that Marcus had quietly set in motion 4 days earlier, long before Craig ever sat down at that kitchen table across from me. By the time detectives came to the house with a warrant, Craig Doyle had already tried, unsuccessfully, to wire $11,000 out of a joint account and book a one-way flight to Cancun. He was arrested that Friday afternoon. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, and endangering the welfare of a minor. Once prosecutors were finished laying out just how deliberately he'd built the case against my grandson, piece by piece, in the days he assumed nobody was watching him closely enough to notice. Rachel woke up 9 days after that midnight phone call. The first thing she asked for, before her own mother, before water, before anything, was Tyler. I stood in the doorway of that hospital room and watched my daughter reach for her son with both arms, watched him fold himself into her the way he used to when he was small enough to fit there entirely. And I understood, standing in that doorway, that this was the only verdict that had ever really mattered to me. Craig pleaded guilty 4 months later rather than face trial, once the evidence against him became impossible to argue with. He is currently serving a sentence of 18 years upstate. The insurance company, once informed of the fraud, voided the policy entirely, which meant Rachel walked away from that marriage with nothing but her health, her son, and I like to believe a little more of her old sharpness restored. The version of my daughter who used to argue with me about everything just to prove she could. It is spring now, 6 months on from that terrible autumn, and Rachel has moved back into the house Diane and I bought 40 years ago, the one with the wraparound porch and the oak tree Tyler used to fall out of as a boy. Tyler starts college applications this fall. He wants to study criminal justice, which some days makes me proud beyond words, and other days makes me want to sit him down and warn him about every hard thing this work will ask of him. Rachel laughs again, actually laughs, the sound carrying clear across the yard on Sunday afternoons, while Biscuit chases a ball he never quite catches and never quite gives up chasing anyway. I sat on that porch last weekend, watching the two of them argue cheerfully over how to grill a piece of chicken. Neither of them had any real idea how to cook, and I thought about how close I came to losing them both to a man who understood, better than most, exactly how to look trustworthy in a room full of people who had already decided to trust him. I think about Tyler sitting in that hospital corridor, 16 years old, watching the adults around him believe a lie about his own hands before they believed the truth in his eyes. I think about how easily that could have gone differently if an old detective hadn't still had a few favors left to call in. Family isn't only the people who share your roof or your blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up in the middle of the night without asking a single question first, because the asking can wait and the showing up cannot. I have learned, across 63 years and 31 of them wearing a badge, that the most dangerous people rarely announce themselves. They hold doors. They remember birthdays. They call you sir. And somewhere behind the good manners, if you look closely enough, and if you're willing to trust what your own eyes are telling you even when your heart doesn't want to hear it, the truth is always sitting right there, waiting for someone stubborn enough to go looking for it. Has someone in your life ever turned out to be wearing a mask you didn't see behind fast enough? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this one kept you up the way it kept me up, do an old man a favor and hit subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from, and I promise you, every single one of them is worth staying for until the very end.